Can you do it for us as well? Yeah. Yeah, but I know what happens. I know that from previously. You ask people to do it, and then it doesn't come.
You never get them.
No, get it now.
Oh my God, really.
Yes, of course. Hello, everyone. Hello. Hello. Right. Shall we start? Right, welcome back to the second panel, this time about economics in AI. So it's titled AI's Gold Rush, Crafting Economic Policies for a New Age. This panel will delve into the economic implications of establishing Britain and the wider EU as an AI superpower and technology implicating changes of how we think about the world of employment and economics in general. Let me welcome our panelists for today. Professor Birgitte Andersen, Professor of the Economics and Management of Innovation at Birkbeck Business School and CEO of Big Innovation, serving also in this capacity as Secretary of the UK All-Party Parliamentary Group on Artificial Intelligence and Blockchain. Then we have Mr. Kenneth Kuke, Deputy Executive Editor at The Economist and co-author of the New York Times best-selling book, Big Data. Next, Ms. Mary Towers, Policy Officer for Employment Rights at the Trade Union Congress, leading a project on the use of AI in employment. Then we have Merlin Hay, the 24th Earl of Erroll, who is a crossbench member of the House of Lords and actively served in the several parliamentary groups on the impact of regulation on business and the internet. And last but not least, Dr. James Luke, the current Director of Innovation at RUG and formerly served as CTO for UK public sector at IBM Global Services and Chief Architect of IBM Watson Tools. Thank you for taking the time.
Hi everyone, it's good to welcome you to the second panel for today. We'll be discussing a very exciting topic titled AI's Gold Rush, Crafting Economic Policies for a New Age. My name is Ayan Tola, you can call me Tola. I'm a researcher at the Bennett Institute for Public Policy here at the University of Cambridge, and I work on questions of digitalization, innovation, and AI. Good to have this exciting panel with me. So let's just get to it. I'm your moderator for today. And so when we talk about AI, right, everyone really jumps at large language models, large multimodal models, just as we were saying, and generative AI. But really, artificial intelligence has been with us before now for decades, right? Dr. Luke, you've worked on speech recognition and, image recognition, a lot of other techniques before the introduction of foundation models. What exactly is exciting about generative AI? What's different about it? What exactly is exciting about generative AI? What's different about it in terms of productivity and economic growth? How does that impact us differently?
Generative AI has caused, there's some incredibly good technology behind generative AI. One of the challenges we've had with machine learning for many, many years, and the algorithms aren't new. The algorithms go back to the 50s and before. But we never had enough data, and we never had enough processing power. And that's what the big web companies have done is spectacular in bringing together that volume of data, the processing power, the science, the distribution, the way they are operating these large data centers. They have achieved something very, very special from an engineering and a technology point of view. The technology is not sentient, and the technology is basically a probabilistic model, and it is designed to solve web problems. So if you want to ask a question, when was Neil Armstrong born, there will be a very high probability that somewhere on the web there will be thousands of documents with that information correlated due to proximity. 5th of August 1930, it's a test case I've used. So that sort of probabilistic question answering is very, very effective using this technology. but that model does not translate into other applications. And the big danger here is that people are assuming generative AI is all that AI is, and that it's achieving sentience, and that it's going to have a much bigger impact than it actually is. And there's a real danger with that. There are many more fields to AI, and AI is not going to be solved just by throwing huge volumes of data at a single algorithm. So the technology is fantastic, but we really need to address the lack of understanding of fundamental AI that's creeping into society, because it's taking the narrative in the wrong direction.
Maybe I should come to the elevator on that. So it seems as if there's an AI hype, right, with especially being powered by the top generative AI companies, right? In what direction might this be taking us? Are we missing something, especially with, like you said, potential?
I think we're confusing a lot of things is the trouble. And I think this is where you're absolutely right. We are talking about generative AI, and I've been listening to all that. Whereas then people are talking consequences if they're talking about artificial general intelligence, which is something completely different, strong AI, where you're talking about controlling things and producing decision-making and perhaps trying to control people in the world and everything like that. And then you've got subsets and other things like that. For instance, presumably the battlefield AI will be different because it's got different objectives, which is killing people, whereas on the whole, you won't be thinking of trying to do that, I presume, on the whole, on stuff that's going to try and control, help people behave right and do the right things in the world, or if you're trying to have a legal system or something like that. And I've been actually around in this world of extracting data and trying to format it well for reports for some time. It has been around for quite a while. And there you've got to worry about what you're firing it at. And so we're very much trying to do it for companies and certain things where you've got a curated data set. So you know the information you want. If you fire this off at the internet, you're going to get all sorts of stuff. And you're going to find a lot of it's inaccurate. And it's great fun doing that with Gemini and with Copilot and all the other things like that. You can get all sorts of wonderful answers. There's quite a fun one, but was George Washington White. You ought to look at that. Anyway, that's sort of just very recent. But that's what it's about. I think people are muddling up all the different AIs, and I think they're worrying therefore about the wrong things in many cases. AI can be hugely powerful to help someone extract information. They were talking about the education. For extracting information, the other side of it is how you present it. Well, that's where the students ought to be working weighted. But for extracting information, for goodness sake, we all had to learn how to use indexes on the encyclopedias before. And then we learned how to use Google and other things, or Firefox and all the other different things. That's finding out information. Information is not knowledge. Knowledge is putting it together a bit, but wisdom is how you use it. And that's what you're really trying to find in your top people. And that's why we're going to be the people who lead the future in the jobs and everything like that. And they'll be disruptors.
I mean, just before I come to you, Professor Bridget, so just to follow up to that, what would be the types of, for the lack of a better word, concrete AI or traditional AI systems that are exactly very useful for us economically? I mean, just beyond Gen AI.
So there are many, many different algorithms. People always assume now that AI involves machine learning, and it doesn't. Machine learning is an admission of ignorance. You use machine learning when you don't actually understand the fundamental system. One of the first mistakes I made very early in my career was in Formula One, and I took a load of training data from a control system developed by the Formula One team's control systems engineer, and I trained a controller. And I went to the control systems engineer. Now, control theory has decades, hundreds of years of science behind it. It's a massive field. And I went to this brilliant control engineer, and I showed him my AI model. And I said, look, I've created this using data trained from your system. And I've done it in an hour or two. And he said, brilliant, it's great, apart from the fact it doesn't work. What AI machine learning is doing is mapping inputs onto outputs and usually fitting some sort of surface that it smooths, and so quite often you miss exception cases, you miss the brilliance of the science. So we need to put the fundamental engineering in there. So AI shouldn't always be machine learning. You may have conventional expert systems, you may have rules-based systems, you may have conventional mathematical models, you may use simulation, you may use all sorts of different techniques. We may get AI emerging from just combinations of algorithms. I'll walk out of this building later and my phone will tell me how far I am from my car, and it knows where my car is parked and it knows where my home is, and that's a very simple algorithm. But then you put it together with somebody else's algorithm that knows that I've used the last of my milk in the fridge, and somebody else's algorithm that knows where a shop is, and they start to conflate, and you get an emergent AI. So there are so many different forms of AI coming along. We really have to be careful that we use all of them, and we use them for the right things, the right technology for the right problem.
Can I comment on this? So basically, I'm an economist, so I'm more involved in productivity and how AI is changing systems. So from an economics perspective, and also through the work which we did at the parliamentary group on AI in Parliament, we created a taxonomy, and I can we came to many different types. So just to highlight some of them, we have machine learning, we have predictive analytics, there's computer vision or face recognition, there's chatbots, virtual assistants, there's the natural language processing models, there's intelligent data analytics, there are robotics, automation, there are recommendation systems, and then the new kind of new types of AI that is integrated into generative AI, edge computing, quantum computing, and explainable AI, non-explainable AI, and autonomous weapons and metaverse. There are many. So AI takes many forms. So when we're looking at how AI is really transformed, so I mentioned here probably about 15, and when AI is applied into different industries, whether it's in research, as you discussed in previous panel, or whether it's into healthcare or into finance or teaching or military. Different types of AI is used in different ways, and we've also had, the police force is also using AI. So over time, of course, these types of AI is getting blurred, not blurred, mixed, because there's a fusion going on. But in the beginning, 5 years ago, we would have talked them all in separations, but now they're all fused.
I've got a question for you, but before then, I'll just go to Kenneth.
Ask your question. I'll hold my fire.
Okay, cool. Professor Anders, you talked about these very many different forms of AI, right? And I'm an economist as well. And one key thing we talk about is, the rise in computer systems, right? And alongside that, the cost of computing is falling, right? So there's a saying that you see the computer age everywhere, but in the productivity statistics, right? Despite all these numerous forms of data innovations, why aren't we seeing, especially in the case of the UK, a corresponding increase in productivity growth? I mean, productivity growth has been stagnant.
I think this is very clear why we're not seeing it. That's because the AI revolution is not about producing more things. It's not about that. It's about quality. So therefore, we're investing in a lot to produce more qualitative output. But the problem with productivity statistics is that it measures numbers and quantity of things. So this is really, that's have always, with these new revolutions, been about, productivity is about input you use for output. But if you only use numbers of eye operations at the hospital, but not how good they are, or there's also only so many computers and mobile phones and refrigerators and things we can have in our house, and cars in the street, but it's about the quality increase. And also with AI, it has been very much about the qualitative increase in professional services like finance, health services, education services. So it's very much about, so service sector is very big in it, but it is about a quality increase rather than quantity increase. We're not producing more things, but we're producing better things and connected things.
Better technology over quantity. Kenneth?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to pick up on. Let me get to the solo paradox of we see the computers everywhere except in the productivity statistics. To first maybe take a step back and talk about what AI is writ large, right? And what the revolution in machine learning means. And why, if you will, AI is not computing, right? And I think that's important because, we could have a laundry list of all the different ways in which it's going to change things like predictive analytics, but it might not actually be AI or machine learning or certainly deep learning, which is at the cutting edge. So I'm sure for some people, I'll give a synopsis, a very short potted history of AI is going to be sophomoric, and I apologize. For others, it's going to be novel, so I'm going to sort of put it out there, because it's a challenge to some of the other speakers to say, like, hey, there is something quite distinctive and special here, and I think by understanding where the technology is and what it does, it's going to help us answer some of these questions about why we may not actually see it in GDP growth or in productivity. I think eventually we will, but if we don't right now, there's some fairly obvious answers why not. So what is AI? Really, I mean, let's poll the audience. Who here could give me a definition of what AI is? Raise your hand. Okay, there's 2 people, 3, and then the hand is halfway up, right? I have not got 4. Okay, so you can see, like, some people feel confident they have it. In fact, I'm sure the person who would articulate it, if they're wise, would have a lot of caveats as well. It's vast. We don't really know what human intelligence is, but we sort of know it when we see it. At the outset of AI, it was simply trying to create computer systems that did the things that humans could do and the human mind could do. Okay? The term for it was cybernetics, right? It was Norbert Wiener. But he was a real jerk. Nobody liked him. He thought he was really vainglorious. And so they needed to, when a bunch of younger researchers wanted to talk about it, who were more on the cutting edge of computer science and not mathematics, he was a mathematician, they came up with the term artificial intelligence. We're stuck with the term. It anthropomorphizes something that is really, well, what? So that's the what is important, because computers barely existed at the time. It was more of a theoretical exercise. At the time, they were trying to create a long list to take the original computer programming for AI was called Lisp, was list programming. And so you would try to decode all the ways in software of how a human being made a decision, because it was sequential, and it was rational, and it was logical, and you'd find out all the steps, and if you were missing a step, you'd interject another one, and you'd get it. And the problem with that is actually it's not so bad. You get a little bit of progress, but it's quite brittle, and it fails pretty quickly, because humans are not sequential, they're not rational, they're not logical, and so you can't rely on that as a technique. At around the same time, around 1960s, there was another technique that came around, which was, if you will, this idea of a neural net, right, based on how a human mind would work in a rough approximation. And it showed a little bit of, it was called a perceptron. It showed a little bit of promise, but not much. But the grandees of AI at the time absolutely rejected it. Marvin Minsky, John McCarthy. And the reason why was that, well, they said that it was not going to show promise, it was not going to be able to work. And they weren't wrong. Chips were really expensive. Processing power wasn't very robust, and you didn't have a lot of data. So all of AI went down the route of sort of creating a list and trying to decode the way a human being thought. And for things like translation and other things, it got you so far but no further. Around 2000, 2010, a change shift happened. And that change was the machine learning revolution. What it was basically cheap processors and lots of data. The term for it was big data. It was a shorthand for machine learning. And suddenly, you didn't have to describe to a computer what to do. For example, how to identify a cat in a lot of images. All you need to do was give it lots of examples of it, if you will, feed it lots of data, and it could infer the rules for itself what a cat looked like through it. ImageNet 2012 was the great sort of landmark moment in which the machine learning, in this case deep learning, technique was the method by which it was going to be the future of AI. And now it was all about data and processing power. So why would machine learning be really important? Because we know what a cat looks like, right? And then a computer now can identify a cat, right? It's supervised. But what if we don't know the answer to something but can still give it lots of data? Can it infer something that we don't know and can't see? And starting a decade ago, lots and lots of papers started coming out, particularly in healthcare, that answered yes. You take lots of scans of pathologies, of biopsies, right? And then you give patient survival rates. You don't say if it was cancerous or not. You simply say, is there severe cancer or not? And it is going to infer not only that it's severe cancer, based on survival rates, but why? And then when the researchers, this is Daphne Kollner and Andrew Beck, 2012 or so, at Harvard and Stanford, when they actually tried to identify what it was seeing, what they found was that the AI could identify 12 telltale signs that showed severe cancer, but the human pathologists only knew of 8 of them. 3 of the things that were spotted were not possibly to be known by the human eye. So we are now piercing the frontier of knowledge with AI. Now we're off to the races. So where does this end? Why are we not seeing it in the statistics? Well, first, it takes a long time to get approval for this. It's not yet part of current practice. Once it will be, the cost decreases. From a very basic level, for GDP statistics, you're not going to see the gain of that, because if you're no longer paying a lot of money for a pathology exam, GDP goes down.
Right.
Because it only measures market transactions.
Right, we'll probably come back to some of that.
There you go.
Mary?
Yeah, so I'd like to bring perhaps just a slightly different perspective to the discussion. I'm from the Trade Union Congress, and we represent about 48 affiliate trade unions from both England and Wales. And amongst those trade unions, they collectively represent about 5.5 million workers across this country. And from our perspective, the use of artificial intelligence at work is seen through the prism of people. Trade unions are all about people and about people values, what people do at work and what they care about, but also what the impact, the lived experiences of workers of the use of artificial intelligence at work, not only in terms of people carrying out their role and how artificial intelligence has changed the way in which people work and how people work alongside artificial intelligence, but also how people are managed by artificial intelligence when AI is carrying out the role that a human manager usually carries out. And something that is often missing in discussions like this is actually the voice of people and what their lived experience is of technology. So I just want to tell you about some of the experiences that people have of AI at work and about some of the research that we've done of those experiences. And impacts, lived impacts of workers include things like, for example, work becoming more intense and people having to carry out work quickly and at an unsustainable level. So, for example, a worker told us that they thought that technology should benefit workers, but that their colleagues had experienced the overbearing use of technology to push for better performance, with workers being issued with GPS trackers, and if they stop for 1 minute, a yellow dot comes up on a map and it's reported to a manager, even though there might be really good reasons for a 1 minute stop. And then in terms of equality and discrimination and unfairness, another worker told us about, for example, algorithmically driven targets with times set for completing a task regardless of age or disability, and then people being managed out of their job if they can't meet their targets. Or, for example, pregnant colleagues who couldn't complete tasks as quickly as usual, but the algorithm didn't take things like pregnancy into account. So it's just to highlight those sorts of lived experiences of workers. And in terms of productivity, ultimately productivity is rooted in people. You know, it's people who really decide and produce and engage with productivity and change productivity. And in that respect, what trade unions say is that to enhance productivity, we need strong trade unions. And it's accepted by organizations like, for example, the OECD and the IMF, that strong trade unions and strong collective bargaining is absolutely key to high productivity in workplaces and to high worker engagement. And so we say that collective bargaining, and that's where workers and unions agree with employers, work collaboratively with employers to agree terms and conditions at work, including how technology is used at work. And where there's strong collective bargaining, there are more equal workplaces, happier workplaces, better terms and conditions, and therefore greater productivity. So from a trade union perspective, this is AI at work is a people issue, and we collectively can co-govern the use of artificial intelligence at work and determine whether it is used for the greater good to make work a better place for people, a safer place, for example, a more rewarding place. And collective bargaining and strong trade unions are at the heart of that.
Yeah, well, yeah, thank you for that. Obviously, you made a very good point around collaboration and stronger unions. I suppose the question is, how can, traditional labor structures, right, like this one, adapt to, new practices, especially with, the use of AI in the workplace to fight for people's rights? Like, what are some of the new policies, I suppose, that could be formulated for these?
So, I mean, what we say is that achieving effective co-governance of technology at work it's a bit like a jigsaw puzzle, and that we've all got a different piece of the puzzle to contribute. And we're very, very keen as a movement to collaborate with as many different people as possible. But from our perspective, what we have to offer is firstly collective agreements, which we say are an ideal vehicle for the co-governance of technology at work. And so we can adapt collective agreements to suit specific sectors of employment, so that the collective agreement between workers and employers can be tailored to suit the requirements of the particular sector. But not only that, a collective agreement can provide the apparatus for worker engagement with the use of technology at work. So just by way of example, you could have things like a data committee at work, and you could have workers who are trained in artificial intelligence, communicating about artificial intelligence, being able to participate potentially in the development of artificial intelligence, as well as the method of procurement and application of technology at work. You could even have an expert sitting on that data committee or an algorithm committee. You could have an expert that the employer pays for to help that committee shape the use of technology at work. And again, from a worker perspective and from a trade union perspective, because people are at the heart of all of these issues, we say it's workers who understand their work and their role better than anyone else, and therefore it's workers who are best placed to shape the technology that they are going to have to work alongside. Otherwise, what happens is you end up with employers effectively buying technology off the shelf, and that the technologists who have developed that technology don't necessarily understand the function that their technology is meant to fulfill. So an HR function is an ideal example of that really, if a technologist doesn't have a true understanding of the employment relationship and how that operates, then the technology that is implemented into the workplace it's not going to fit the human relationships. It's not going to fit the employment relationship. So it's workers that know best how the technology should operate, and they must be given a voice in that process. So collective agreements, but also regulation. And legislation, urgent legislation, is at the heart of this, and this is where we strongly differ, actually, from what was being said in the previous panel about how, these are risks that we need to investigate more, that will pan out, and then we can legislate. No, we say we need urgent legislation, and that's why the TUC is working on a draft AI and employment bill that will put in place measures to ensure full transparency, so that workers understand how the technology in the workplace is operating and making decisions about them, so that there's a register where employers have to disclose that when artificial intelligence is being used to make important decisions about people, and a range of other measures. So those are two bits of the jigsaw puzzle that we as a movement have to offer: collective bargaining and also our proposals for regulation.
Can I just comment quickly? What do you do at the TUC then when we have soon before 2030 about 40% of the workforce being freelance and just being working online, and this is a global workforce, not a local workforce, and they are submitting micro work into a range of companies, and lots of that they basically just have to be competition on whether their computer program or whatever they have submitted, whether it's being picked up and paid for, because of that, this kind of calls out, and then you have micro workers submitting some algorithms or other things, or some data sorting for certain companies. The companies pick the best and they pay those they like, and they don't pay the rest who've done an effort. What do a trade union do for this kind of increasing group of workers who actually have no bargaining position? They have no even a regular income, and no pension, no health insurance, etc. Do you think about just people in permanent jobs, or do you think about how do you do about the freelancers?
Okay, right. Just 1 minute. You go for it. 1 minute. Yeah.
Just quickly. Yeah. I mean, in a sense, that's an issue that takes us a little bit outside the ambit of this discussion, because it really goes directly to the heart of how one defines employment status. There's actually quite a large category of people within that group who are often working under bogus, essentially they are bogusly self-employed, and ultimately they should fall within the legal worker category and access rights that are afforded to workers under employment legislation. But that aside, those who are genuinely self-employed, we argue that they should be supported with, for example, stronger social protections, but that also they should be afforded rights under collective agreements as well.
Right. Since we're talking about regulation, so I'll just move to my next round of questions, which I'm going to put together for Dr. Luke and the Earl of Wirral. I think the first question is about, so last week I was reading the UK's AI policy document, which it calls a pro-innovation approach to regulation and all of that. What does this really mean, right? And I suppose within that, there's a study in the UK that when it comes to digital adoption, the firms who actually adopt digital technology more, whether AI or other types of digital technologies, are already the large firms, right? They are already the firms that work in IT, that work in this other sector. What does this mean for small businesses, right? In a way, you want to promote innovation. On the other hand, you want to make technology development as safe as possible. What are the options that are there for government? Obviously, you have the classic, policy instruments like, tax credits and all of that. A radical idea that comes to my mind is something like subsidies for developing safer technologies. So you come up with AI models that are a lot safer, and perhaps you get some subsidies for that. Obviously, that crowds out potentially other potential technologies, right? So what does this mean for the UK, right? In terms of, you've got regulation on one hand, protecting consumers. On the other hand, you really want to ensure smaller businesses as well take up,
So the single thing that I believe could help dramatically improve and help the UK lead in AI is improving education and fundamental understanding about AI. We're hearing it in this conversation. We're hearing applications, techniques, algorithms all jumbled together. We're hearing people talking about all sorts of different issues, and it's a very confused space for people to listen to. If you actually, just from an understanding the technology point of view, we've probably got a room full of people here who've actually used this technology quite a lot. Can I just ask how many people have actually programmed a perceptron? Okay, not many. How many people have actually taken a tree algorithm and watched the information divide as it gets cascaded down the tree? So fundamentally understanding, so a reasonable group, probably unrepresentative of the general population, but still not the whole group. We focus entirely on the algorithms, and we hear about models and biased algorithms. What we don't focus on is the engineering around it. This is like introducing cars at the start of the 20th century, and every discussion is around spark plug technology and the latest advance in fuels, and nobody's really figuring out how to actually do all the engineering around it. And there needs to be much more. So we've talked about employment issues. There are a whole host of things that will stop you achieving successful adoption of an AI. And just to be very, very clear on my position, I've spent my entire life from the age of 11 when I got my Sinclair ZX81 trying to program intelligent machines. I think it's because I didn't have any childhood friends, but I'm fascinated by this technology, and I want to deploy it everywhere, and I want I want the UK to lead in it. To do that, we've got to get the engineering right. You've got to deal with what is the accuracy you require. So accuracy, if I achieve 95% accuracy, that sounds really good, because when I get my A-levels, 95% is really good. When you get on an aeroplane, the pilot says I crashed 1 in 20, it's really bad. So accuracy has to be much higher. Understanding what that actually means and how do you measure it. And I think that the cancer example is a really great one, because that's an area where the technology can work so well. But put yourself in the feet of the oncologist. You look at the scans and you say this person hasn't got cancer. The AI says they've got cancer. Send them for the biopsy. You look at the scans and you say they've got cancer. The AI says they haven't. You send them for the biopsy. what decisions are you making based on these outcomes? What are the impacts on the workers? Quite often, to get the training data curated, we need the workforce engaged in that. They're not going to be engaged if that's going to put them out of business. So it's about augmented AI. And there are about, I could go through a whole list of criteria, I've written a book on it, where you need to take into account how you apply AI. So the message from me is the technology is fantastic. There does need to be regulation, but we have regulation. We have regulation in applications. We have regulation in safety. We should be regulating what we're doing with the technology, not trying to regulate the algorithm. There's no such thing as a biased algorithm. There's biased data, misapplied, misunderstood, applied in the wrong way. So fundamentally, it's about education. It's about growing our knowledge and putting engineering around it. AI is not engineering free.
Actually, can I say, I agree with you very much wholeheartedly on that last point, particularly, which is I don't think you can begin to regulate algorithms and things like that, because it all changes and moves. So and as a whole lot of the stuff, anyways, self-learning. It hasn't really got an algorithm. It's a learning algorithm. You don't know what it's taught itself, and you don't have a master there to tell whether it's right or wrong. There are some people working on that sort of thing to test. But leaving that aside, you've got to regulate the outcomes, I think, and make companies responsible for the outcomes. The other thing I think we mustn't confuse is there will be companies make a lot of money out of writing the AI software and programs and being able to make money out of all that. But at the other end, there's all the people who can use the AI sensibly and intelligently in order to run a better business or do business they couldn't do, discover things they didn't know about, and all that. And that's where, to me, the opportunities are. Whenever we've seen a big technological revolution, from the agricultural revolution through the industrial revolution, through everything, right through to, I can remember accountancy software when it first came out, and I actually wrote an accounts program at one point. And people said, oh God, all these poor bookkeepers and accountants can be redundant in 5 years' time. Are they? The work changes. And suddenly, instead of just putting out numbers and being able to add up 3 columns simultaneously, one in 20s, one in shillings, and 12 pence per shilling, which a really good accountant could do, that all became completely redundant. And so actually what they weren't progressed onto was actually giving useful words of wisdom or information or advice and things like that. So the jobs change, and I think that's going to be a difficult thing because some people won't have the new skills. So the question, what you do with them, this is the point with the TOC. At the same time, you can't keep people artificially in a job just so that they've got some pay. So we need to think about what do we do about the completely different retraining possibly, or how we do anything. But there's going to be a big shift, and it always happens. It's always painful. But the thing, at the end of it, we always end up with more jobs, somehow. I promise you, AI is not going to wipe out the world of work or anything like that. There's a very good science fiction story about it I read 1,000 years ago, I remember, where actually, because robots were running everything and AI was running everything, well, all you had to do, people had to do is consume. And you had a compulsory consumption target, which you had to hit every week and every month. And if you didn't, I can't remember what the serious penalties were at the end of it all. But the whole idea was that humans didn't work anymore. We were just consumers in order to keep the factories employed and the robots employed and everything like that. Anyway, there's some wonderful dystopian stories like that, and they're great fun to read. But really, it hasn't happened, and it won't happen. And the great thing is to learn how we can use the different AI tools in different ways and different purposes in ways that will help you in your business or what you're interested in or your creativity or reach the right decisions or give the right advice. That's where the real market is, I think, in the future.
I have to add one very important point, because it's just, I do think it's ironic. I do think it's ironic. We all thought that AI was going to take away work from us so we could all focus on poetry, painting, the arts. AI is so intelligent, it's gone straight and taken the poetry, the arts, and it's got us all out doing the mundane stuff.
Just a follow-up on that, actually. So you mentioned AI is probably actually going to create new jobs. Do you have examples of those kind of jobs?
We're not there yet. AI is very new.
Yeah.
It's hardly got there, Yeah.
Yeah.
I can remember the match against doctor's diagnosis back in the 80s and 90s, and it's very interesting. Because when the doctors didn't know they were being tested, I think they were right about 50% of the time, and the AI, which was very, very early day, was getting about 60 or 70% right. When they told the doctors they were being tested, they improved up to about the same as the AI. But the real problem where the doctors made the mistakes, was interesting, was they were always looking for the clever little things. So you get distracted by that, whereas the AI was looking for the major symptoms and Most of the time they were right, and it's just probability of that. But if you've got a rare disease, the AI couldn't find it. You had to hope with the doctor at finding it. You know, if you just let slip that you've been, I don't know, say in Africa 2 weeks earlier, they would just think, aha, were you swimming in rivers with nasty reeds? You might have bilharzia. AI would never have heard of it. No. And that's the interesting thing about it. It has huge limitations, and this is where, again, the wisdom and the intelligence, and people who go on looking for the unusual things and follow trends, because the LLMs will have a tendency to self-reinforce. And again, you've got to be careful. And if you've got a curated database, that's dangerous too, because peer review tends to consolidate the current knowledge. Because people don't like, read the second half of Stephen Hawking's. He admits it. He put down one of his students for at least 2-3 years because it was destroying one of his theories. Right. He eventually admits it.
Just a quick one. In medical education in America, there's an aphorism, which is to say, if you hear the sound of hoofs, think horses, not zebras. To that point, which is to sort of think of the obvious thing, not the most obscure thing.
Exactly. Yeah. Absolutely true.
Just very quickly, just to reintroduce the worker experience and people. When one speaks about the replacement of creative function by AI, ultimately there are people behind that creative function. And it is important to think about the impact on individuals of automation of their role. In a creative context, obviously, there are a whole realm of other implications that go directly to the heart of essentially what it means to be human and what the human experience is. But that aside, in terms of automation, I just want to introduce the concept of transition, because ultimately we're in a period of radical uncertainty. Organisations like the ILO, the IMF, and also organisations like Goldman Sachs, for example, who published a report recently on predicted the extent of automation, that there are conflicting views about how everything is ultimately going to pan out. But the one thing that is clear is that there are going to be radical changes to the workforce and to how people work. And therefore this becomes an issue about transition, and how do we ensure that there is a just transition. And ultimately, even if the numbers all work out okay in the end, it's still people's lives that are changing in the middle. And how do we ensure that those changes and that transition takes place in a just way? And I would like to draw some parallels between the principles for a just transition that have been set out by the ILO in relation to adjusting to a carbon neutral society, and to perhaps pose the suggestion that we should apply those same principles in terms of the use of AI in society and the transition that we will all have to undertake together. And those principles do include things like the importance of worker rights, securing worker rights, social protections, and training, and job security. And I would add to that the vital importance of social dialogue and social partnership.
Can I just say very quickly on that? And you're absolutely right, and that's the problem, is managing the transition in skills, because the skill sets and everything change. And the question is who picks up the cost at that point. And I suspect you've got to be very careful of dumping it on the companies, particularly if they're medium-sized or smaller companies. And I think the government will have to take a huge responsibility for that bit of where the people have to move from one skill set to another. Do you see what I mean?
Absolutely in agreement that it's a public funding issue, because it goes directly to the heart of what a social good is, and ensuring that training applies across the workforce, not just the workforce, but as a citizenship issue as well,
absolutely.
Is a matter of a public and social good.
Right. The government aren't very good at doing it either. That's the trouble.
I guess on that, we just jumping into government now. Professor Anderson, let's drive it on a bit in the context of the UK. What are some of your most important thoughts in terms of economic policies around AI, right? Increasingly, competition policy is becoming relevant, especially in the digital market. How do you think competition policy, for instance, can improve, AI adoption and innovation in the UK?
Well, I think that one of the most important things which we have about policy and AI is related to some of the things I discussed at the AI Safety Summit. Of course, we have kind of the gold rush, whatever you called it, to the AI revolution, where it's very important to be out first with the new technology. But then we have sometimes not understood how the impact is of the technology. So a couple of weeks ago, we had the hearing at the Capitol Hill in America of the tech giants on how social media platforms was influencing the experiences for those who are using the platforms. And we had one in the UK, maybe equivalent, a year ago. And I think that this whole area with AI safety is very important. And this is not only about social media platforms, it's also about the experience at work, etc. Some of the big things that was highlighted at the time, and that's part of the AI safety bill, and which is also part of what's being discussed now, is this thing of accountability. We're unclear about accountability. When something goes, we can all agree on the upside, but when something goes wrong, who's accountable? Is it that the one writing the algorithm? Is it the company producing the product that has the algorithm? Is it the user of it, etc.? Who is accountable? Also, the loss of human control is very important, that all of a sudden the AI kind of runs with it, and we're losing control over how AI is actually being used and applied. That could be a medical operation, where the AI know better how to operate the eye rather than the doctor. We're happy, and we use the autopilots on the airplane, but how are feeling with the theater, at the hospital, and other places? Unintended consequences that we think that we didn't expect that to go wrong. Nobody expected all these teenagers to commit suicide. So it is there when there was a Capitol Hill, and there are many other. The unintended consequences, job displacement is clearly we have discussed. The effect of human relationships is a big issue. It was discussed a lot during lockdown, but AI can impact human relationships. And then something about the lack of cultural diversity on these natural language processing models, such as ChatGPT, etc. There is no culture. So that means that when they express a view on something or express anything, art or stories, etc., there's no culture in it. So if we're all kind of accepting what comes out, we're losing cultural knowledge and cultural awareness, and cultures are also feeling maybe exploited to some extent. And I've gone with privacy, security, transparency, discrimination, bias, inequality, social justice, deep fakes and manipulation is a major, major thing. We have a meeting coming up here on the Parliamentary Group on AI about the role of, in March, on deep fakes and misinformation and democratic processes. So there are many, many IP issues and generative AI. Right. I could comment on a lot, but there are lots and lots and lots of issues that were discussed at the AI Safety Summit, and which we are discussing in the Parliamentary Group on AI. And I just list the issues here, but they go across all sectors. They just have different way of expressing themselves.
Well, I guess on that note, I'll come to the Earl of Errol. You did mention that government should be regulating outcomes, not necessarily algorithms, right? And I wonder if there's been an interesting point about how the extent to which government is involved in AI development, the entire value chain, right? And there's a radical idea by Mustafa Suleiman when he said government should actually be getting involved in building AI models. Do you think this kind of involvement, like, either red teaming, building AI models, or experimenting with AI? Recently, the UK government published a report on its experiment with generative AI in the civil service. Do you think this kind of approach could, one, help build government capacity, but secondly, expose government to the blind spot in terms of regulation, right? You kind of focus on what the end goal is of the technology rather than the algorithms themselves.
Well, I think the problem is it depends what you mean by government. And this is the trouble. And this is a hugely general thing. You'll probably pull me up for this immediately. But most people, I think, go into the civil service because they want to help people and make the country a better place. And they like safety and security. And they tend not to be geeks. They tend not to be. I'll refer to myself as a geek because I did physics, chemistry, maths, and I was regarded as very odd by my contemporaries. There were only about 4 of us now. And we had a lot of trouble with the footballers because they used to bully us. So I made some nitrogen triiodide in chemistry labs and it sorted it out. It's highly unexpected. Don't recommend it, by the way. It's very unstable. Don't let it dry out on you. You'll blow your hand off. Anyway, I should have said that in a public forum, should I? Anyway, sorry about that. Anyway, going back on this, the point is that you don't get sort of people in the civil service who think they're going to get stuck into trying to do a whole lot of AI stuff. It's the wrong place. And It's the same with politicians. You don't go into politics if you're a radio scientist because you don't want to go around shaking, being very nice to a lot of people you can't stand and all that sort of thing. And so this is the big problem with it. And people, I think, are looking to the wrong people to do this sort of thing. So all that the politicians can do, and the civil service very much help them think about how you do it, because that's how. But Parliament should be thinking strategically. The civil service should be sorting out how you actually achieve that strategy. And the politicians should be thinking therefore about what is it that's frightening us about AI? What is it about the results of AI? The sort of thing that you're worrying about in the TUC. That's the sort of thing that we should be worrying about, is how we handle the fact of the change in society and everything like that. Not getting stuck into trying to do its own AI and stuff. It'll only make a complete horlicks of it.
Can I
just a minute?
Yeah, I mean, government, I don't believe, should be trying to drive the research in that sense. But government's a massive consumer and spends a lot of money. The defence budget, the national security budget, the health service. We look at the NHS and what we've got with the data in the NHS. I genuinely believe that we are 20 years behind where we could be if we had properly text-analysed NHS data and applied AI correctly for the last 20 years. And the biggest challenge there comes back to education of those who are procuring the systems. Lord Harris mentioned earlier Galileo being, was a heretic. I've stood in so many procurement situations where you've tried to give best advice and the people have followed the crowd. Because the religion has said, we're buying a text analytics tool, we're going to buy it for 10 years, we'll get a static set of content, we'll test it. And what you should be doing is getting 4 of these companies, having live services and continually testing and switching between them. But when you say that, it's Galileo, you're a heretic. So we've got to get better at empowering companies to deliver.
I'm afraid it's part of the government procurement system, and that's been the huge problem, because they tend to go and buy big. They think it's safe if they buy a big company, and that ends up being the big systems integrators who are foreign. They're American. Or there's only one that isn't. And the trouble is, when we've done it ourselves, then we lose the contract, so they buy us up, and then it gets subsumed into there. And their interests are not the same as ours. They may be our allies, but they're not our friends in trade and business. And you have to be aware of that. Exactly. And we've got to break that. And it has to start probably by having different people in procurement who don't come from those same companies themselves that are inside the civil service.
Right.
I probably shouldn't be saying too much about that.
Well,
exactly.
Kenneth, I know you had a thought, but I've got one final question for you before I go around again. So this point is about compute power, right? Essentially, in economics, the idea of specialized markets are kind of too small to be regulated from the point of view of competition policy. And if you look at when it comes to chips manufacturing, right, one of the companies that holds the largest share is in Taiwan. Produces the most number of chips, and it's powered by another company, I think ASML in Netherlands. So it uses machinery from ASML in Netherlands. In this kind of market, it's kind of hard to actually introduce, competition policy, right? It's because essentially you need that market running, right? So what does this mean for the future of AI if you have a very few powerful firms who are actually controlling, chips production?
I think this is a very niche question. So let me put out, just to maybe make a reflection on the panel so far, a bigger economic point, and then answer your question. I think we've touched on the idea of productivity, and we've touched on the idea of jobs loss, but I think we've not really gone to the core of both issues. And I'll put it out there, and we can talk about it maybe if that's of interest, and I'll answer chips. For productivity, there's the question, will AI create a productivity explosion? There's a lot of evidence to say that actually this as a tool could actually unleash levels of productivity that have been quasi-unimaginable for us. And what does that mean? But however, there's a lot of economic history that says it's not going to be as much as the optimists say. In the case of jobs, we've been talking about transition, but Mustafa Suleyman in his book, The Coming Wave, basically says, here are all the arguments for the idea that technologies create, job loss, but create new jobs. But he thinks that in this instance, that's not going to be the case. It's going to break the chain, because why wouldn't AI just do the new jobs that would otherwise be created after it replaces the old technologies. So he believes that actually jobs are going away and they're never coming back. So we might want to talk about that. If we think this is possible, do we want to create a bureaucratic edifice by the state to try to preserve those jobs? Maybe for some of them. But if not, what does the future of labor and of the state's responsibility to citizens mean if those jobs are never coming back? Yuval Noah Harari refers to people as the useless. And what he means by that is in the 19th and 20th century, the individual got their political power by being an agent in the economy. Unless you brought the workers with you, you couldn't actually govern. You needed legitimacy, and if not, there would be a revolution, etc. But if individuals no longer have jobs, if they're no longer needed as an agent in the economy, then they actually serve no purpose politically. They've been denuded of their political power. Interesting question there. Of course, in America, the consumer society was fueled by the consumer who is also the economic agent, who is also the political actor. Political participation matched the enfranchisement of the middle class. Okay. Chips. Quickly, I don't see a big problem. You've got a concentrated market, but you also have a lot of competition. Market concentration and monopoly domains are an incentive as a signal for lots of other actors to go into that. We are really at the outset of the AI era when it comes to the chips that we're using and all of the ingredients that go into the chips. So I think that unless there's an abuse of market position, which I don't think we see, we would see that, but they're not. I mean, they're trying to make it as much as possible and sell it as quickly as they can. Let the market function, and if not, we'll know in 5 or 10 years and we'll have to take action.
Yeah, I want to comment on the tips thing because I think it's a huge issue in my view. I was just 2 weeks ago born in Kuching, in one of the biggest, building one of the biggest chips manufacturing and design hubs in the world, and they're trying to counter Taiwan and China, and they're trying to work with the United Kingdom. In fact, they are coming here in April to sign an MOU with Cambridge Science Park and then also the semiconductor catapult and 9 UK organizations. And I'm involved in the sustainability strategy. And the issue for the UK here is that these chips from China and, well, Taiwan's clearly much better quality, but Taiwan is going to be very dominated by China in the future. There's a huge, well, I hope not either, but there's a huge geopolitical issue here. So we need to take a hand on this chip design and production. So what are the issues here for policy? Okay, chips can become much smarter with AI. Chips need to be more sustainable. They need to use less energy. They need to use better sourced minerals. They need to be able to be recycled so they can be put apart and recycled and put back into, rather than being in the garbage wastelands of electronic waste. If it's huge, they need to be able to be reused. The longevity of the chips is very short. They need to be longer. They need to, the sensors in the chips need to reach longer. They work very, very poor on wind turbine and offshore energy, and under the water. They don't work when you're 1.5 meters down. So the whole issue of marine systems. And I go on and on and on with the sustainability issues. And I think UK has a huge opportunity here because we are very good with chip design, and if we can create good links with manufacturing enterprises, other places, and work with other chip designers, we have a huge opportunity. So that's what I would say in terms of policy.
This is exactly why we shouldn't allow ARM to be sold abroad. We should keep ARM as a British company. And I think that's one of the biggest strategic mistakes we're making right at the moment. Their chips are in all the mobile systems throughout the world, and to hand that over to foreign power is madness.
Right. I think we can save some of the points for the question. So I'll open the floor now for the question and answer session. So if you've got questions, gentleman over there.
Yes. Yes, we are. Unfortunately, Trump deciding to have a trade war with China did us no favors at all. Just he wanted to, because Huawei nicked Cisco's patents and done its stuff and grabbed the infrastructure for the internet. Didn't help at all because we're so dependent on it, and that's why we must support Taiwan and pray it stays independent, because it's the only other real source of chips we've got at the moment. Right. There are a few others around the place, but we're far too dependent on two sources, one, two, or three. I mean, there are some other sources. But until we build up capacity elsewhere, which we've not proved ourselves very good at, which is a huge danger, yes.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, ARM. Who's buying? SoftBank, isn't it? Nvidia's involved as well, in some way. I'm not sure. I haven't gone into the detail, but it was. Sorry. Well, I think it's still in discussion, but I'm not very sure. Yes, it's SoftBank. Who's behind SoftBank?
ARM is a Cambridge-based company that designs chips, doesn't manufacture them, it designs them all. It's quite a small company. It's a very wealthy company, and because of that, other banks are trying to buy it from overseas. That's it. Is that fair?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. But the point is the intellectual property in our design is here in Britain, and it's in all your mobile phones.
Right. Usman, and then I'll come to you. Yeah.
So you discussed the effect of AI on the labour market and innovation, but how can the UK government establish a balance between the combination of benefits that it can receive from AI and promoting the innovation towards it and curbing the consequences it can impose on the labour market and potential structural unemployment?
Very quickly, there is, I think it's a World Bank paper on taxation, IMF paper on taxation structures that might try and help that. I don't know enough to be able to comment on it properly, but there are people thinking about it. And if you go and try Googling it or co-piloting it or Gemini or Kaimai or any of the various things out there.
Do you have any thoughts on that, Mary?
I'm really glad that you've asked that question, because I did want earlier in the discussion to challenge the idea that it should only be commercial interests that drive innovation in relation to artificial intelligence. We believe it's so important that there are other interests in society that have a say over innovation and that drive innovation, and in particular that there should be worker and union-led innovation. Worker-led innovation to ensure that AI is used in a genuinely useful and beneficial way at work, and union-led innovation so that AI can be used to help, for example, evidence trade union campaigning to ensure and secure better terms and conditions for workers. But in order to do that, we need to break the stranglehold over information, data, compute, and also human resource and machine learning specialists that is currently essentially held and monopolized by big tech and other huge organizations that have an enormous amount of resource that not-for-profit and civil society organizations can't even begin to compete with. And we've all been referencing Mustafa Suleyman. I'd like to do the same and say that there is a bit in his book, The Coming Wave, where he specifically references the importance of movements, of the trade union movement, but also other movements in society. And the reason for that is to provide that counterbalance to the stranglehold that commercial interests have over innovation. It's really, really important that other interest groups in society drive innovation.
Right, thank you. The young lady there. can I respond to that?
Yeah, can I respond to that? Don't take today and extrapolate, okay? Just sort of open up your mind more broadly and think about what the future might look like if things that are expensive become really cheap, right? So I won't bore you with historical analogies, but I'll just sort of skip to the chase and say, imagine that a pathology exam that today would cost £100, right? It's probably a lot more, but £100 is now a penny, right? Literally a penny, orders of magnitude different. Now, what that means is that you don't feel bad and then you self-present to the NHS, right? And then have someone look, you could imagine a pathology exam, taking place, all the time, or literally we could actually analyze saliva and maybe look for after you brush your teeth, right? Every single morning, right? And we would be analyzing things about your biochemistry all the time, learning for the onset of disease, not when it's too late because you already feel something, but years before it actually happens. We have a predictive sense of you're going down in this direction, so we can have the most modest of interventions to save your life. So you live better, and of course it doesn't put a toll on the NHS or the healthcare services, that in fact it frees them up to do things better. That, in a sense, is the vision that I imagine the world going towards. So this idea of I think we can rail against the idea of big tech trying to get a 1% pump on its effectiveness for a recommender algorithm for a TikTok video. Nobody wants that, right? I mean, there is a benefit to it, but it's meager compared to so many of the other things. But when you do talk about healthcare and the role of data, there it's pretty extraordinary, but not because we keep the same model that we have today and make it more efficient, but because we change it radically. It doesn't look the same. We do new things, and that's what's to play for.
Right. Okay, just on a final note, just go around everyone. Could you tell me in one sentence what's your biggest optimism and biggest fear about AI?
My biggest optimism is the point we just heard. It allows us to innovate and do things so differently and transform if we choose the right problems, which is your point. Scoping the right problem is the first part of any engineering project, and people often assume AI. The first question I ask a client, or clients always say to me, is, why can't we get the AI to do this hard, impossible, challenging thing that a human being can't do? Well, if a human can't do it, why do we expect an AI to do it? There may be reasons, but why? So it's about transforming the way we do things for the better. My biggest fear is not about the AI, it's about ignorance and misunderstanding and misapplication, both creating missed opportunities and slowing us down and failing to exploit.
Excellent.
I agree, actually. This is probably the simplest thing to say. And something you just said in the middle, you used the word ethics in the middle of the things you're saying. Suddenly occurred to me, one of the problems is how we test outcomes from some of this stuff. At some point, someone could decide whether the AI is doing the right thing or the wrong thing. Well, the thing is, it has no inbuilt moral code or anything like that. So maybe we should get all the big religions together to fund putting together some AI stuff against which the outputs from some of this self-learning AI, etc., will be tested. I don't know. Oh, ethics. Sorry, I heard ethics. I couldn't hear you very well, is the trouble. My hearing's, I ought to have a hearing aid, I think. But anyway, okay, well, I've changed it because it is one of the big problems is people are terrified of what the AI might do or say. So I think we need something there against which the outputs could be tested in some way, but I'm not sure how you do that. Anyway. Oh, very quickly, a self-learning thing, very amusing. I watched the thing on Elon Musk in his car. It says we're coming up to his roundabout, we've never explained what a roundabout is, but it's seen 50,000 videos of roundabouts, etc. It does the right thing. Anyway, it goes on like that. It suddenly occurred to me, what if someone accidentally slipped 10,000 videos of joining British roundabouts in?
Okay, so to me, the most optimistic thing, of course, is that AI is doing everything we hope it's going to do, create everybody better off financially, more healthy, longer lives, access to education, more public safety, and all this. This is, of course, the whole purpose of why we're doing it. We hope that's all come true. My biggest fear I think if I shall only put one thing on, that's probably to be that if the control of AI is unequal, so we get into this kind of a world where it's dominated by the few companies, a few individuals, like Elon Musk or others, they have sole power to control the way in which we interact with AI, whether it's at hospitals or when we socialize, etc. So this kind of polarization of power is really my fear. But I'm sure that with the right policies, etc., we should be able to get over it. But that is my biggest fear.
Right. Thank you, Mary.
Can I give a thought in a quote? Quickly.
Just a minute, on a minute, please.
Okay. So my thought is that I want to draw a parallel between AI and electricity, because I think AI is potentially a miracle in the same way that electricity was, but it also has dangers attached to it in the same way that electricity does. Electricity is a public good, and AI should be too. We all deserve to benefit from it. And the answer to whether or not we do is essentially a collective question. We need to act as a collective to shape how AI is used in our society, and that's where trade unions, as one of the last bastions really of collectivism in our society, we have a strong role to play in that. And the quote that I want to end with is from Yanis Varoufakis in his recent book, which I think probably a lot of you here in this room may well have read or would be interested to read. But he says in that book that if light can have two contradictory natures, and if all of nature rests on a binary opposition, then hardened iron, steam engines, and network computers could also be simultaneously potential liberators and enslavers. And it's up to us collectively to determine which of those two it will be. We need to decide as a collective how we manage this amazing gift that we have in our society. And I very, very much hope that you all join a trade union and make sure that it's used for the public good.
Powerful thoughts. Thank you. Kenneth?
Yeah, so the dystopian view is that, that just as we're seeing sort of a democratic backsliding and the rise of nationalist conservative movements and right-wing sort of anti-democratic movements around the world, that there'll be a fusion between those illiberal leaders and the enormous power of AI for surveillance. So it's a surveillance state that is more real than before, empowered by AI. The beneficial view is, I think we're going to be in the next, I think AI is our generational project. It's going to define the next 30 years really writ large. And the biggest gain, I think, is going to be in piercing the frontier of knowledge in the sciences. If you see the world as a large search space of knowledge that we don't know versus that which we do, we're going to probably expand our knowledge in ways that are going to be quite dramatic.
Right. Okay. And that, ladies and gentlemen, brings us to the end of today's panel. Thank you very much to our panelists for sharing their wealth of knowledge. And thank you to everyone for coming.